I'd like to introduce Lasse Norgaard-Larsen, Director, Americas IT for Marriott International. Lasse is responsible for voice strategy at Marriott, covering 5,600 plus hotels and includes profitability, franchise services, and other sources for Marriott International. He also held numerous other technology leadership positions outside of Marriott. Lasse is also the leader of AT&T's 911 location work group alongside Frank Melville of Phone Suite. Lasse, welcome. And is there anything you'd like to add about that introduction to yourself?
No, I think you did it perfect. Thank you very much, Patrick. I'm excited to be here today and hopefully talk to a few of our fellow hoteliers, fellow competitors, and also some of our good service providers and partners out there regarding this change in legislation and law that will impact a lot of our phone systems out at our hotels, specifically in the US.
Great. Well, thank you, Lasse, again for being here. Maybe to get us started, what is Ray Balmers Act and its impact on telecommunications for hotels?
So Ray Balmers Act in its most simplistic fashion really is today and the past 20, 30, 40 years, when someone from a location in the United States places a 911 call, the phone number is transmitted along with that call to the emergency operator, typically referred to as a PSAP, the public safety answering point. That answering point will get your phone number and they'll get whatever address is affiliated with that phone number. So for example, for a hotel, it could be 100 Main Street, any town, United States. And that's all the information that the PSAP gets when that 911 call is placed. Typically for a hotel perspective, what would happen is a emergency service personnel would respond. They would show up at that address. Again, for 1 hour hotels, it would most likely be the front desk. That would be the central meeting point. The front desk would then direct and say, yes, we did get an alert that came in that room 200 called 911, and they will guide them to that location. With Ray Balmers Act, it essentially adds a dispatchable location is the technical term for it. And what that means is you now transmit 100 Main Street, room 200, any town, United States. So it does have to include a physical location. The street address is no longer sufficient. You need to get down to a more granular level. Verbally, per the FCC, for a hotel, that would most likely include something like a guest room. Now, it's very important to understand that Ray Balmers Act is not just for hotels, it's for any building out there or any office that has a multi-line telephone system or MLTS system, aka a PBX. So whether you're operating a small insurance office with 10 agents working in it, or if you're operating a hotel with 2,000 guest rooms, you're going to be in scope. Anyone that has a PBX, you must follow these guidelines. They do kick into gear in 2021, in January 2021, I should say. And it is for net new systems only. So there might be a couple of vendors out there or a couple of consultants that may be trying to push certain upgrades. Right now, I think it's very important to understand that these are only for net new systems or for significant upgrades that you may be performing to your voice infrastructure. So again, if you have a PBX that may be 5 years old and you're not really making any changes to it, you're not going to be in legal scope for Ray Balmers Act. But if you decide to buy a new PBX, for example, in February of 2021, you would absolutely be in scope for Ray Balmers Act.
Great. Thank you, Lasse, for the great introduction. I'd like to focus in on dispatchable location, and part of the reason why AT&T's work group exists is to help expand on what those definitions are and at least help hoteliers and vendors and suppliers understand what the nuances might be, if there are any nuances, and where the fine line between actual location and feasible location might be established. So when thinking about location in a hotel, a room number is very easy to understand. What do you think the dispatchable location might be for tennis courts in the northwest quadrant of a large hotel resort that maybe doesn't necessarily have a easily identifiable path or way to get there? Is that one of the nuances that hotels need to be worried about, especially in those categories?
Absolutely, especially high risk areas, right? So if you're operating a large resort that may have multiple swimming pools, sadly, swimming pools is an area where there could be some severe injuries that maybe need to be reported. It also could be things like restaurants. It could be, to your point, right, Patrick, tennis courts. you are obligated to provide the easiest locations for an emergency responder to respond to. So whatever information you can really transmit feasibly for those quote unquote unique locations that may not be a guest room number is really what you should aim to do. So from FCC conversations, if you have a swimming pool, one is on the east side of the building, one is on the west side of the building, you should actually include that information in the 911 call. And of course, if you're ever in doubt, especially for large resorts, I do think it is always a great effort to reach out to your local PSAP, call the non-emergency number, see if you can find out who the local contact is, saying, hey, listen, I operate this very large 1,000 room resort. I really want to make sure that, God forbid, that there is an emergency at my hotel or resort. What information can I transmit along with the call that makes the dispatching of an emergency responder easier for you? So it's always good to have that dialogue with our both police, ambulance, fire team out there. So definitely work with your local PSAP is kind of the gist of it. Don't call 911. Call the non-emergency number for them.
Great, that's great information. And could you maybe talk about the ecosystem of suppliers and even the PSAPs as you referred to earlier? I mean, there are thousands of PSAPs, is that correct?
Yeah, so a little bit of a challenge to roll this out from the FCC side, and I do think the gist of the law is good, and I personally don't think that anyone would really object to the spirit of the law, which is to enable faster response times to our emergency personnel. We do see some challenges with there's so many different PSAPs out there. They operate on technology that may be 2 years old. They may be operating on technology that's 20 years old. So it does become very challenging from the different PSAPs to understand, well, what information can we actually receive from these different suppliers and different providers? And on the kind of vendor or supplier side, there are quite a few solutions out there as well that will do the job of Ray Balmers Act, which is to relay the dispatchable location. Again, very important to understand that this is not just for hotels, it's for any PBX system out there. So obviously it's in all these suppliers' best interest to make sure that there's a very good feasible solution out there that meets all the requirements, all the demands, and complies with the law at a, for all purposes, competitive price point as well. Still think there's some confusion out there between the different suppliers. There's still a little bit of a disconnect with the FCC of what actually truly works and where responsibility starts and stops. But over time, obviously, that will be worked out. And I do suspect that the very first PBX systems that we see installed in the early part of 2021 may be going with one supplier, but they may have to change, or the product or the configuration may have to change a bit, just as these smaller details get ironed out.
Great. So what do you think are the right questions that hoteliers should be asking their service providers to make sure that they've addressed the spirit of the law?
Yeah, so good question, right? I think work very close with your vendor or your trusted partner, ask them in detail about Ray Balmers Act. I kind of wear two hats, right? My primary job is I work for Marriott, but secondarily, I also represent HT&G in this 911 work group. We have produced some really good documentation so far in this work group. There's definitely more coming. You're always welcome to look this information up. It's on HT&G's website. You can always validate, hey, does this really look accurate? Again, what we would strongly recommend hotels they look for is don't be forced into buying something you may not need. If you're not anticipating or planning to do any PBX upgrade for the next few years, that's fine, you don't have to. If you are making an upgrade or a change to your PBX, then absolutely you will be in scope for this law. And it is extremely important that you comply with the law, both from it's the right thing to do. We really ought to make sure that the emergency service responders needs to get us quick to your location and help, whether it's an associate or a guest or another visitor at the hotel. It's extremely important that we get that fast emergency response time, but we also shouldn't be buying solutions that don't fulfill that. So ask questions of your vendor, make sure you look at the HT&G documentation. If you feel like you're being overcharged or you're being pressured into a sale that may not sound right, there's probably a good chance that you're being asked to buy something that may not be needed.
And part of the regulations talk about, but don't necessarily prescribe certain technologies to solve for these issues. In the work group, we talked about the I3 set of standards, which are not necessarily mature nor well adopted at this point. We've also talked about DID-based solutions, which have their own implications, either in scarcity of DID numbers or frankly, costs associated with that. But what are the available solutions to date? And what do service providers and hotels need to do to come together to pick what works best for the industry? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's still evolving very much so, and I don't think that there's like a gold standard out there yet. I'm not going to mention different vendor names, but there's a handful of solutions out there. There are quote unquote middlemen that sits between your phone system and the 911 operator or the PSAP. There are also solutions where you may just utilize a DID phone number with every single call that has its own headaches. And as you kind of alluded to, Patrick, there's some cities don't have a lot of DID numbers, so that's not really a feasible solution either. And I don't think that the spirit of Ray Balmers Act is to deplete the count of phone numbers in the United States, because that'll happen very quick if everyone started just assigning a direct phone numbers to every single guest room. I also think that over time the marketplace will become much more financially competitive. Right? You know, if there's a middleman out there that is going to charge a few dollars per phone per month in service, that just doesn't become feasible for the hotels to do it that way. And there's got to be some alternative solution. I think the I3 protocol is probably a very good play so far, but we are actually learning that a significant portion of the PSAPs simply can't receive the I3 protocol. So what good does it do us if we try to comply with the law, we send all this information, but the receiver never gets it? No one wins in that case. So that's why it is very important. You got to have that kind of three-way partnership between, you know, the hotel, your PBX vendor or reseller, and the solutions that they may recommend, but certainly do not forget about the PSAP out there. And it is quite overwhelming just due to the sheer quantity of PSAPs that exist in the United States. And especially if you get into like a larger hotel group or a larger enterprise that operates in many different states or cities or counties, you may easily be dealing with hundreds, if not even thousands of different PSAPs. So this is definitely a challenge.
Great, thank you. What do you think the vendor or supplier community, especially around MLTSs or PBX systems, or however you want to couch a telecommunication systems for a modern hotel, what do they need to be thinking about adding to their product roadmap here in the near term, either by the enforcement date, which again, as you alluded to earlier, doesn't necessarily enforce on existing phone systems, but it would enforce on net new systems. What do MLTS providers need to add to their roadmap to make sure that this is working for hotels in the future?
I think something to work on is really to come up with a very easy to understand solution, right? So a lot of hotels out there may not have a very large IT staff. They may only be operating a handful of hotels. How can you make their life easier to understand what this is? How can you make it so it's 100% compliant with the spirit of the law? And how can you make sure that it works in whether you're in Kansas or New York or California? How can you make sure that this solution actually works for those different counties, jurisdictions, and PSAPs? And at the end of the day, it has to be done for a competitive price point, but you don't want to skimp on quality either, because this is truly, I mean, there are humans' lives at stake here, right? The goal of this law is really to ensure a faster response time to emergency service personnel, and we cannot slow that process down. We should all be doing our best to make sure that we comply with that law and we get this thing rolled out there, but it does have to be easy to understand. I'm not sure if we're going to get into the FCC conversation, but certainly we're trying to work with the FCC on some further clarification too, so make sure you keep an eye out on their website, on their FAQs. I think the FCC has done a relatively good job with some FAQs. We're trying to get something additionally added in for the hospitality industry that answers a couple of frequent questions that we've seen out there, and we'd like to just get some written clarity around it.
Great, thank you. So we've got roughly 30 to 40 companies on average participating in the work group. But can you maybe talk about your experiences with the broader systems or ecosystems, including owners, operators, as well as the vendor community about their awareness of these issues, especially with COVID-19, reduced resources, reduced personnel. Certainly some things like this may kind of get under the wire without much knowledge, but can you maybe talk about the industry's readiness to adapt to this law?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, no one could really predict what happened earlier this year with COVID-19, and obviously it shifted a lot of focus away from many different projects and over to just really the core function of the hotel industry and operations. So with this law now being rolled out, I do think that the hotel and hospitality industry, we are a bit behind, and we definitely have some catching up to do. There's been some conversations among the kind of the bigger flags out there. I am concerned about the smaller to medium-sized hotel chains that just may not know what's happening, or especially independent operated hotels. There's a very good chance they don't know what's happening. So got to keep the focus going on this. There is no extension of the deadline based on what we heard from the FCC, so this absolutely will become law. And there are still some gaps out there. I think the FCC is aware of that too. I think we're aware of it. I think the PSAPs are aware of it. I personally spoke with one local PSAP in my community that were not fully aware of Ray Balmers Act, to say the least. So there's also some communications issues on the other side. I think our work group is unique in the way that we have, this is the spirit of HT&G, right? We have a lot of different competitors, both on the hotelier side and also on the vendor and the partner side. At the end of the day, we're all trying to do the right thing here. I don't think anyone is going to argue to say that this is not the right thing to do, but certainly there's some more work to be done out there and getting the word out. I think we have had some good success with people like Mr. Hank Hunt that actually joined our work groups. In case anyone not aware, I'll probably do a little intro of him. Mr. Hank Hunt spearheaded Carey's Law, which was the one that ensured we had direct dial 911 from the guest rooms. And obviously there's a very, very, very personal story behind Mr. Hank Hunt. Carey was his daughter. And I'm sure most of you may have heard the story, but if not, I would encourage you to go out and read it. And Mr. Hank Hunt, kudos to him, spearheaded this whole effort of getting Carey's Law rolled out and implemented and signed into law. And Ray Balmers Act is kind of taking that to the next level where, okay, great, we fixed the direct dial 911 situation. You don't have to dial 911. You just pick up a handset and you dial 911 and you get an emergency operator. Ray Balmers Act is aiding that project even further by actually getting the dispatchable location out there. So I think continue to work with your various different partners, get involved. Welcome to join the HT&G work group. We are kind of further down the line, but there's certainly still plenty of work to be done, and we're going to be updating documentation for a while. So would love some input and dedication.
Great, thank you, Lasse. And to dovetail onto that, HT&G's work group is working on best practices, which is about to be published. We're going to move on to feasibility tests and other technical requirements and even recommendations for the industry to adopt certain standards that either exist or need to be made as a result of needing to communicate dispatchable location through telecommunications or automated means to PSAPs and emergency authorities, again, to do the right thing to make sure that our guests, staff, customers, and anyone who's in a hotel is as safe as they possibly can be. But Lasse, to wrap us up, is there any final thoughts you want to add about the topic?
I think just very important for everyone to understand that by the end of this year, so between now and the next 2-ish months, I think it's very important that you do go out there, you do meet with your PBX maintenance provider, whether you're using premise-based PBXs, cloud PBXs, or using some other service. I think it's extremely important. Ask them the question, is there anything I need to do to be compliant with Ray Balmers Act? Just ask that question. It shows that you're taking an active interest in this. Now, most of them are going to come back and say, no, you don't have to do anything unless you're planning to change the PBX. So that's kind of the red flag. If you're planning to change a PBX, you've got to make sure that your partner understands how this is being done. And again, if you have any questions, get involved with the HTG work group, look at the documentation. We have some great work that's been put together by an amazing team that are all dedicating valuable time outside their already way busy work schedules to do this. It's almost like a little unpaid side job, as we always reference it to being, but we have some great people working in that group there. Myself and Mr. Frank Melville are the chairs of the group. If you have any direct questions, you're welcome to reach out to us directly as well. Patrick does a great job at kind of overseeing the different work groups. We also have Dick Wagner as well, representing the HTNG team. So.
Great, thank you, Lasse. And again, thank you for your support in HTNG over the past couple of years, and certainly with your current leadership of the 911 location work group.
Well,
for more information about the team, you can find us at www.htng.org. Thanks and have a great day.